This edition of the Geopolitics and Empire podcast is being recorded with a group of students. We are interviewing Professor Emeritus Dr. deHaven-Smith of the Reubin O'D Askew School of Public Administration and Policy at Florida State University. He has written over a dozen books and numerous articles, and his work can be found on his website at deHaven-Smith.com. The book we are discussing with him today is Conspiracy Theory in America, published just 4 years ago. One review of the book states that even the most incredulous readers will find themselves questioning their own preconceived notions of paranoia, governmental transparency, and conspiracy theorists. In this book, he develops his definition of state crimes against democracy, SCAD, or high crimes, and describes how the term conspiracy theorist was created by the CIA in 1967 to essentially discredit dissent and criticism of the government. Thank you for joining us, Dr. deHaven-Smith.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to start with the following. I was listening to some of your lectures online, and one of the fellows introducing you stated the following: "We don't learn about oligarchy in academia." I'd like to get your comments on this, and aside from this being sort of obvious, I find this a vital issue because academia is one of the battlegrounds from which arise either brave citizens who will make the world a better place or a neutered set of graduates who perpetuate the status quo.
Well, we stopped using the term oligarchy. It was a common term in classical political philosophy up to, I would say, the 1900s. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a common term, but it got replaced by authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I think we would be better off using the original term oligarchy. We found that it fits very well with the Russian case, where you have sort of a kleptocracy and you have oligarchs that are embedded with the government and the economy. And our government is obviously, the United States is starting to look like that as well. But it's not taught. I mean, if you think about how government is viewed in political science and public administration today, people think of it as an arm of the public, that the government is carrying out the wishes of the public, and it's an illusion, bizarre. It's strange that they can, that we develop this idea in the face of counterfactual information, but that's the way it stands.
And could you briefly summarize for us and the audience your term state crimes against democracy?
State crimes against democracy refers to crimes that are committed by political elites to circumvent or bypass or undermine or manipulate the normal democratic processes in a advanced liberal democracy. That's about all I would say about it. It used to be called high crimes. I think that's a good term for it, but people just don't remember what that means. And I wanted to add some actual content to the term, and so I used this SCAD concept. It names something that we're not supposed to talk about. So I mean, we needed a name for it because the conspiracy theory meme shuts down communication. You can't talk about it, and so it has to be named for us to start dealing with it.
And other terms have been floating about. Something just recent we've been using a lot in the class, and so the students have been using the term deep state. And I know in the past there have been other terms such as friendly fascism, totalitarian democracy. In your book, you call it smart totalitarianism. Would you consider all of those synonyms? And what are your thoughts on the recent resurgence of the term deep state in the media?
I think the term deep state is useful. It's amazing to me that it's being used now on the United States national media. It wouldn't have been used 3 years ago, but things have changed. But I have a a disagreement with the term deep state, because it suggests that there is a cabal or a fairly small group of people who operate behind the scenes and are cohesive in their objectives. I'm inclined to think that the deep state is not so deep, that there's a surface to it, that you're not going to cut out the elected officials, the president of the United States and the senators and all that. They're on the surface, and you can do a lot of things, but you got to get the support of those individuals somehow, and they're enmeshed in all of this. And how they are is a question, a research question, I think. I started talking about networks, SCAD networks or SCAD nets, on the assumption that these conspiracies are not, the product of a single, unified, cohesive, secret government, but instead are politically opportunistic networks that come together at certain times. It doesn't mean there's not cohesion there then. I think when John Kennedy was killed, that was an agreed to decision. Let me tell you something. If you read the book, you'll see it. You'll notice I had in there that comment that Richard Nixon made when he went to the Soviet Union. And this was about 1966. And he was asked about the Kennedy assassination. And, a professor from Moscow University asked him, how could a free country, supposedly free country, have their president killed like this? And Nixon responded. He said, well, let me point out to you, your head of your KGB, who was a guy named Beria, I think at the time. He said, he was killed. He was executed, I think. But Nixon's point was, he said, when the leadership of a nation lose faith in a leader, that's when things like this happen. So I think he admitted, that there was this crime, and that he couldn't say it outright. But basically, what he was saying was, when the elites come together, they can take out a president. But that doesn't mean they're all the time sitting there at the table talking about assassinating people. I think these are loose networks, and they're competitive. I mean, I'm not sure that one of the phenomena of the current election that we had just this last fall was that both major political parties participated in elite state criminality, in rigging the election. We had the Trump campaign, we know, was in contact with the Russian intelligence agencies, and we've got to do an investigation, but I think it's pretty clear that there was collusion to release emails that were detrimental to Hillary Clinton, to Secretary Clinton. On the other hand, we had Hillary Clinton. The Democrats manipulated the election, the primary process, to get Hillary nominated and to keep Bernie Sanders from being nominated. And I would add a few things to the Clintons. One is, and people don't think about this much, but the Benghazi attack, it was really something of a state crime against democracy. And here's why. It occurred very shortly before the presidential election in 2012, sorry. It was in, I think, September, October. It was right before the election, and they had to make it look like it was a spontaneous revolt or riot, as opposed to an organized terrorist attack, because their line in the election was that, this is Obama, their line in the election was that Obama had Al Qaeda on the run. So she's participated in some of these. I think I got confused there, but anyway, but we had both parties doing this, and that's a first. And it really shows the extent to which our elite political class has become a lawless class.
And you mentioned JFK, and some students had some questions on JFK since we've been reading about him. Anyone wanna come up and ask their question? Save me time from reading it. Anybody? Come on. And you gave a few examples in your book about it in the early chapter, but here's a question.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Galia here.
Hey, Galia.
Can you switch it so I can read my question?
Oh, sorry. There we go.
So my question goes, such as a successful trial about the assassination of Martin Luther King, do you think there's a possibility that could happen with other homicides of North American characters such as JFK or, well, his brother Robert?
Oh, yes. I think John Kennedy was assassinated by the CIA and other organizations in the political class. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated by that same group, or parts of it. Martin Luther King was certainly assassinated. I mean, there was a trial before a judge and a jury that found the government complicit, the U.S. government, and specifically the military intelligence units participating in the assassination of Martin Luther King. George Wallace, a conservative who was running against Nixon in '72, appears to have been shot. And, I mean, look, think about it. Anybody that ran against Nixon got killed or shot.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you were in any other place in the world, and you saw people that were competing against a leader getting killed under mysterious circumstances, I mean, you would think, yeah, sure, I know what's going on here. When we see these Russian diplomats dying of heart attacks and the like today, we're inclined to say, well, that's Putin or somebody in the background that's doing this. The only reason we don't do it in the United States is we've been indoctrinated not to believe our leaders can do that. We think we're different. Everybody else does this kind of thing, but America is different.
Thank you.
And that's part of your SCAD methodology, which you say you tie these events together. And like you say, JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, we saw that a few weeks ago, we looked at, as you mentioned, the court transcript of the verdict in 1999 that declares the government guilty of assassinating King. And I just discovered this book recently by Susan Williams, a South African researcher.
Yeah.
And
it's a normal tool of statecraft, and there's a reason they do it. Charismatic people, there's only so many of them. They don't come along every day. So we had John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and George Wallace was charismatic for a Southern conservative. But once you take these people out, there's nobody to replace them. They don't just come along any day. And the left leadership in the United States was assassinated. The main charismatic figures were assassinated in the 1960s and 70s. And they never came back. Obama was the first charismatic leader on the left. I mean, and he was truly charismatic. I don't care what your politics are. He spoke to I'll tell you something. I was driving my car in the middle of a small hurricane, and I was listening to Barack Obama address the Democratic convention a couple of years before he was, the election prior to the one that he first ran in. And I literally wept. I mean, the guy was just unbelievable, inspiring. So when you have a leader like that and you take him out, there's not a replacement for it. And you might ask, well, why didn't they assassinate Obama? Well, Obama sold out. I mean, he basically immediately caved. He wasn't going to investigate George W. Bush for lying us into war in Iraq, which is a high crime and a war crime. And, you know, there's all kinds of evidence that he did it, but Obama said, we're not going to look back, we're going to look forward. Well, that's a ludicrous argument. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Any other JFK questions? You mentioned the CIA and the term conspiracy theorist. Could you give us just a quick, this was kind of shocking. I only discovered this a few months ago. And, thanks to your book, hopefully more of this information comes out, how the CIA weaponized the term conspiracy theorists starting in 1967.
We found this out that in 1967, the CIA issued a memo to all their station sites all over the world and told them that there was a criticism of the Warren Commission report and that it was bringing into question the legitimacy of the entire political system, and it threatened it, and the CIA needed to combat it. And the memo said, if nobody's talking about this, don't bring it up. But if they're talking about it, then you need to get involved and say to your media contacts that there's no evidence for this, and these are just people who are under the sway of communists, and they're probably being, trying to get wealthy. They are in love with their theories. And they go on to say, someone would have talked and you can't keep a secret and things like that. It's all the things that people say today about conspiracy theory. So this was done in 1967. We find out about it in 1976 through a mistaken release from a Freedom of Information inquiry. And the amazing thing about it is you can track this through Google Trends, which if you haven't used that, it's a great tool. You get on Google, type in Google Trends, you'll get to it. And you can type in words and see when they first started being used in the media and in books, textbooks, and so on. And what you find with that is there's no mention of the term conspiracy theory until about 1967. And then it just takes off, and we've got this term now that is extremely injurious to public discourse because it prevents you from raising questions about reasonable. Take the Kennedy assassination. If you're not suspicious of that, you've had a lobotomy. I mean, you're just not reasonable, because the reality was Kennedy was taken out in the middle of the day by we found a weapon supposedly that was had a misaligned sight. It was an old carbine, and supposedly he gets shot. We arrest the supposed assassin shortly after that. We take him into police headquarters. We interrogate him for 2 days. We don't take notes. We don't make a recording. Then we announce that we're going to transfer him to another jail, and he is killed in police custody in police headquarters. And the obvious thing you think is, well, they killed him to shut him up. So these are natural suspicions. There's nothing wrong with them. In fact, what's wrong is when you don't have them. Something's wrong with you. And today, people express those in everyday life. Nobody in America doubts that John Kennedy there was more to it than what we got out of the Warren Commission. But the media doesn't say it. The media is totally silent about it. And it perpetuates this taboo against suspecting the political elites. So it was weaponized. I think that the CIA does this a lot. I don't think do you think that Donald Trump came up with the terms that he used, low energy Jeb Bush, crooked Hillary, Lion Ted. He named all of these candidates, and it stuck like glue. I mean, it was unbelievable. Who would have thought? Why would you think Jeb Bush is low energy? I would have never thought that. The guy was a two-term governor from Florida. I know him. He's not low energy, but this stuck like glue. So I think that there are people in the government, outside the government, in the CIA, and so on, that work on the language and deploy terms that are very sophisticated, but very subtle and hard to detect. And that's what most of my research is focused on now. I'm interested in how they're maintaining this surface of legitimacy when there's so many obvious things that are going on. Look at the Trump administration and winning the election. It was such a fluke, and you've got these contacts with the Russians and the interwoven economic ties and all that. If you don't think that there's something going on there, you just have to be nuts. But that's what people do. They shut down the communication with the conspiracy theory label, and I think there are other labels as well.
Questions?
Okay, we have a question. We have a live one.
Okay.
My question is about the deep state, and is this one. Do you believe it's possible to reorganize the state and tear down the deep state? Because I wonder about our possibilities as regular citizens. Should we just accept the fact that change is not possible and that we are disposable pieces of a bigger game that we don't understand or know the rules? How can we make our governments really accountable for their actions?
Excellent
like a big
question.
Thank
That's
you.
an excellent question. I have an answer to it. I've thought a lot about it. The fact is, we have a constitution. All the people in the government, from top to bottom, swear an oath to support the Constitution. The president swears an oath to support and defend the Constitution. The United States right now is operating outside the Constitution, and I mean this in a very simple way. I'm not talking about killing people. We haven't had a declaration of war since World War II. We fought the Korean War under a United Nations statement that asked us to go into war, but our Congress never authorized it or declared it. We've been operating under what are now called authorizations to apply military force, something like that. It's just a term. We had one in the Gulf of Tonkin that authorized Vietnam War. We had one in 2001 that authorized attacking anybody connected with 9/11. We had one in 2002 that authorized the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. We still say we're operating on the 2001 authorization. But there has been no declaration of war, and that on its face is unconstitutional. Add to that we're signatories to the United Nations Charter. If you read the Charter, it's very simple. You can't attack other countries that don't attack you. Get this, you can't even threaten to attack other countries. So we operate, we do that routinely. So we have more or less discarded the Constitution when it comes to our adventures overseas and our persecution of whistleblowers and that kind of thing in our own country. We need to get back to the law, and the key to it is young people in your generation. We need to do some simple things. We need to have law that defines state crimes against democracy as a specific kind of crime that calls for particular methods of investigation and prosecution and punishment. We have juvenile crime as a category, white collar crime as a category. We need state crimes against democracy as a category. Now, when we tried the Nuremberg war crimes trials, it's very instructive. I wrote an article about this. It got no play. I couldn't get it published in the United States, but it was published in a journal called Contemporary Politics in London. And what it did was compare the Iraq War to the Nazi, what the Nazis were tried for in Nuremberg, which was conspiring to overthrow the government and take it into an aggressive war. That was Article 1 of the prosecution. So we have a body of law that we can draw on, but we need to specify this crime, and we need to start prosecuting it and investigating it. The investigation is the most important thing in terms of the next step. Once you define and into law the term, the type of crime, then you need to say how it gets investigated. Right now, it's investigated by commissions of insiders and cronies. I mean, these are people that if they actually did their job and prosecuted and found, uncovered the truth, they'd never be able to work in Washington again. They would never be able to have access. So you get these cronies in there and they cover it up. You're familiar with the Warren Commission, but the 9/11 Commission was even worse. The head of the commission, the executive director, a guy named Zelikow, who was a close aide to Condoleezza Rice, he was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, and he outlined the final report in detail before the commission ever met. So what we need to do is we need to investigate crimes in a traditional way. When we have an assassination, we should, cordon off the area, check it out for fingerprints, get all the crime scene evidence. Kennedy's car, the limousine he was riding in, he was taken to Parkland Hospital. The car had blood all over the back of the trunk where his brains had been blown out. Literally, his brains were on the trunk, and some bone pieces. We know this because the Secret Service said that when Jacqueline Kennedy leaned back to get something off the trunk, it was a piece of John Kennedy's skull. It was a bone. Well, that car was washed while John Kennedy was still in Parkland Hospital. The blood was washed off of it. Now, where in the world would you allow something like that to officially occur when you're talking about an obvious crime scene, and that blood spatter evidence could be extremely important in telling where the gunshots came from? If we had kept that, we would have known the shots, at least some, came from the front, and that would have blown the whole thing open. But this is what, like 9/11. I mean, we cleaned that up over a period of literally a few weeks and shipped the steel to China. We did not even look for explosives or incendiaries. I'm telling you, if you had a 20-story building that was insured and it blew up like that, there's no insurance company that would allow that to go uninvestigated, looking for explosives and incendiaries. But here you have one of the most important crimes ever committed, and we don't even look into that possibility. The anthrax letter attacks are similar. It's just a common thing for these crimes to be investigated superficially and not to follow rigorous crime scene and other. The other thing you want to do is you want to get these people in front of a prosecutor who tells him, let me tell you, when the Watergate burglars, so-called burglars, were in jail, they appeared before a judge. And he said, you're going to tell me the truth, or I'm going to lock you up for 40 years. There were 4 burglars. One of them squealed, and that meant they all went down. And that's how prosecutions work. You go in and you get people and tell them, if you don't tell me the truth, you're going to be buried in the prison system. And let me tell you, rich white guys have a hard time in the prison system. So it's not rocket science to investigate these crimes and uncover what really happened. But what we have right now is the farthest we can get really from a true investigation. We don't control the crime scene. We don't have procedures mandated for how you process the crime scene. You know, the Robert Kennedy, he was supposedly shot by a small Arab guy standing in front of him. It turns out he had a hole in the back of his head, a little bit from his ear, so it wasn't from the front. And the natural suspicion is it was one of the security officers. Their guns were never checked. Then there was a door frame that had a bunch of bullets in it. And the expectation was that there were more bullets in that than the gun could hold. That disappeared. The door jamb was lost. In a normal crime scene investigation, you have a process where anybody who takes evidence signs out for it. You know where it is at all the time. But, you know, we don't do that. We're doing the opposite of that. So what we need to do is just get normal procedures going. If you need a commission of some sort, pick a jury. That's the way this works. You don't pick cronies. You pick a random group of people who don't have any axe to grind, and you present the evidence to them and let them say what happened. So I think it's a simple thing. I hate to be glib about it, but I think that we could solve this problem pretty quickly if we could get some legislation passed. And there's the problem, though, of course.
And that's precisely what happened with the King trial, as you mentioned. We're running out of time. Any questions that you had? Like to come up and ask? Come on.
I can take more time if y'all want. I'm not.
He was asking a question of which article you were referring to.
Oh, okay.
Nuremberg, Iraq. He said Article 1, no?
Article 1 of the Nuremberg war crimes trials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a charge of conspiracy, and it was the American who presented the case for our prosecution. Each of the world powers presented a prosecution, an opening argument. Ours was a Supreme Court justice named Jackson, and he said this is the supreme crime. This is the worst possible crime because in it are wrapped up all the other war crimes. They conspired, and what they did was the Nazis burned down the Reichstag, their parliament, blamed it on the communists, locked up the communists, declared it an unlawful party, took control of the government, and then rearmed the society and took it to what is now called an aggressive war, a war unprovoked. Anyway, to me, it's just very frustrating, and maybe I'm unfair about this, but this doesn't seem that hard to me. The problem is the electorate is not demanding it. The problem is people don't talk about it, and the reason they don't talk about it is because of terms like conspiracy theory, which suppress discussion of it. So we have got to fight back. We have got to form our own terminology. I coined that SCAD term, but it's not. You can do this. You can come up with terms that shape the world. War crime. One of the crimes. Crime against humanity. That was a Nuremberg trial crime. And that was invented there. Jackson said we cannot afford to let these kind of crimes happen, because it's unclear whether we'll be able to survive in the long run if we let them happen. So, we can do this, but it's going to take, frankly, the academics. They're terrible, absolutely terrible. I had the hardest time getting published with this stuff, and it's kind of humorous to me now. I wrote a guy the other day and said, "Do you remember when I told you this? These guys are criminals and these crimes are happening all over the place." And he said, "Yeah, I remember it. And I didn't think it was true, but apparently it is." What can you say?
And so, one question and thought that students often have when we read books like yours is that, and I guess teachers like myself who assign these readings, that we're perhaps somewhat pessimistic, but I think it's quite the opposite. That I'm hopeful in a sense, and the fact that people like yourself are putting out work like this, I think this means that you're optimistic and that you're adding to this forcing of change. And so, I mean, are you hopeful? You're not pessimistic?
Absolutely. I think the United States is at the place where the Soviet Union was shortly before the Soviet Union dissolved. Nobody believes the government. They know these people are lying scumbags. They're crooked. They're all balled up by the huge amounts of money and conflicts of interest. That's why they can say things like deep state. One of the funny things about Trump is he broke the taboo. He had made that comment where they said Putin had killed these journalists, and he said, well, Trump said, well, "You think we're any better than that?" Well, actually, we're not. I mean, we kill journalists, not routinely, but every now and then. Gary Webb, for example, that discovered that the CIA was facilitating the importation of cocaine into the cities in the 1980s to finance the Iran-Contra operation. So, we do it, but we never speak about it. But Trump said something about it. He mentioned that, what's his name? Ted Cruz, that his father appears to be meeting with Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans shortly before the assassination. And people went nuts. How can you say that? Trump, you're doing this. Is just so bad. Yeah, he did the Obama birth certificate, the birther thing. He has broken down a lot of this. And I think we're at a point now where the funny thing about governments and regimes is they seem powerful, but they collapse in a second. They just fall. They don't wither away. They collapse. The Soviet Union collapsed over a period of a few years. And not to say anything better came afterwards, but that's how it happens. And I think the United States is at that point. And that's why we can't investigate this. That's why it's so touchy right now, is because you pick at this and you're going to open up a huge can of worms. And I jokingly say, if people were to admit that the government was to admit that John Kennedy had been assassinated by the CIA, it wouldn't stop there. I mean, people wouldn't say, "Oh, God, I knew it." What they say was, "Wait a minute. What about Robert Kennedy? What about Martin Luther King?" It's like when a child learns about Santa Claus not being real. It doesn't take them long before they're saying, what about the Tooth Fairy? What about the Easter Bunny? So it's, they have to really keep the lid on this, because even a slight confirmation of it threatens the whole house of cards.
Okay, two quick final questions. A few students had a common question of, pretty soon some JFK files will be up for declassification, and they were asking at the same time, well, number one, do you think anything will come of it? And number two, students wonder, we have documents like Operation Northwoods, the Tonkin Gulf false flag was declassified, and numerous others. And students wonder, like, how is it possible that they declassify this stuff that reveals their crimes?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you go look at the Warren Commission report, it is obvious that he was not shot from behind. Okay, there's a point. This magic bullet that they talk about. There's a reason they talk about that, and it is because the Warren Commission says there was a bullet hole in the back. He had in the back and an exit wound out the front. Well, it also goes to say that the bullet wound in the back was lower than the one in the front. Well, wait a minute. If you're firing from 6 stories up in an office building, down, the trajectory would be downward from the back. So it would be higher in the back and lower in the front. But it was the opposite of that. And John Connally, the governor of Texas at the time, who was riding in the front seat, always maintained that there were 2 shots, and that was a separate shot, and he got hit with a different shot. What that would mean is there were more than 3 shots, which means that there's more than one shooter. So there's stuff in the Warren Commission report that, it makes it pretty obvious what was going on. I think to hammer this point again, this stuff is pretty flagrant, pretty obvious. And the question you have to ask is, how's the lid being kept on this? And it's being kept on it with memes like the conspiracy theory meme. 9/11 was a work of art, that term. It was a date. We never assigned a date to one of these, as the term to name one of these events. So anyway, there's an active suppression going on, but people are starting to see through it. And now you're getting some elites like Trump who are breaking down and speaking out.
And a final question. I hope that the next generation of citizens and researchers can build upon your SCAD work and the course that people like yourself have charted. And that's one of the reasons we do these podcasts. Any final thoughts you would like to leave with the students and the audience beyond?
Like some things you can do. I think we should start working on forensic techniques for these kinds of crimes. That is, in large part, how we solved organized crime and got on top of it and started to understand what it was and go after it. We developed ways of tracking it. Wiretapping, for example. I have a few things I'd like to do. We have voice stress analysis machines that can tell when people are lying by the tone of their voice. You also have to use some facial recognition software to check the movement of their eyes. But I think it would be very interesting to run our political leaders through those machines and see when they're lying and when they're not. It'd be easy to run it through on Clinton, where he said, "I did not have sex with that woman." The red light should go off on that. And so we know what to look for when they're lying again. So when they stand up and say things like, we didn't think the Iraqis, we thought they really had weapons of mass destruction. The reality is George W. Bush knew they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They had already figured that out, and they conspired with the British to go in anyway. So, we could run that through basically a lie detector. And another example is cross-checking plane records. We could identify where people were at any given time when they're taking planes, and all our leaders take planes. If you look at the Kennedy assassination, Richard Nixon was there. Nixon was there. Hoover was there the day before, J. Edgar Hoover. There were a bunch, and you would see things like that. So what we've got to come up with is sort of the new fingerprint method, the new forensic method for these kinds of high crimes. And that's how science progresses. It takes an existing observation method like a telescope, and it points it at the night sky for the first time and sees all kinds of planets and all kinds of stars and shakes the foundation of our understanding of the world. That's what we have to do. We have to shake the foundation of our understanding of our political class. It's actually riddled with crime and conflicts of interest, and we need to have detection methods to uncover that.
Okay, well, Dr. deHaven-Smith, we thank you a lot for your time. We urge people to go out and purchase your book, Conspiracy Theory in America, and your other publications. And I believe they can reach you on your website, which I will link to, dehaven-smith.com. And
Yes.
thank you again from Mexico.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this. It was great. You had great questions, and I'm delighted that you're interested in this. These kinds of things are the most important things in the world.
No, thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sure, anytime. Have a